Thank you all. We got a recording going. And but thank you all for taking some time to be with us this afternoon. And as you heard, there's a recording in progress. The recording will be posted on the website after the meeting, and as well as the presentation that we're going to show you today. There was some changes made to just the presentation itself, not the numbers, since it was posted yesterday, but we'll update that after the meeting as well today. Well, before we get started, President Doug Woods would like to say a few words.
Well, I'd like to just kick it off by extending all of our thanks to all of you who've taken time today to participate in this Zoom presentation. This budget is a product of the contribution of many people who have been actively involved in the community. That includes committee members, outside professionals, our staff, past and current board members, all of which have had a firsthand involvement and clear perspectives on the state of the association and the challenges that lie before us. So the process has been thorough and it's been impressive, probably one of the best I've ever seen. Those involved with its development believe this budget embodies the SRA vision and mission and moves the association into a healthy posture, positioned well for the future. As we proceed to present and dissect the budget, I want to remind you that this is your budget to amend, to add to decrease, or redirect. But this is a starting point for wide community input. We welcome your feedback and will incorporate appropriate changes in the final product, which we'll present at the meeting on the 13th of September. So today we ask that you please keep comments focused on the budget. This isn't the time to discuss other issues outside budget detail. So with that, turn it over to David, our excellent general manager. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Doug. Okay, well, before we go anywhere, I hope that I found this slide and this picture, and I thought to present it was kind of keeping everybody in the back of your mind why we're all here and what a beautiful place that Semiahmoo, the Blaine area, northwestern Washington is. It's one of the reasons I live here. So we'll go through what this town hall is going to encompass. This is the agenda for today. We're going to just revisit briefly the board mission and vision statement. We're going to go over, obviously, the 2023 draft operating budget. We're going to review a long-term plan, a 10-year plan that we put together this year, as well as the draft operating budget. Then we're going to have comments and questions. And just by looking at the number of people, we have 46 people on the call. Well, let's see, there's two. We have 44 people on the call. That's quite a few folks to try to entertain questions. And so I hope that when we get to that point, we try to limit the questions or comments to about 3 minutes and allow everyone to speak before, someone may want to speak twice, just so we can get to everybody. That's not to, limit anybody's speech or anything, just to try to make sure that we can get to everybody and make things fair. So we'd like to go through the presentation and then open it up for comments and questions, just because it's quite lengthy and we want to make sure we can get through it all. And then, of course, we'll have adjournment. So with that, today we've got the first town hall budget meeting. This is going to focus specifically on the operating budget. Then we're going to have another one on Tuesday about the reserve budget. The reason why we did this is there was some criticism last year, apparently, I was not here, but that we had the same presentation twice. And for people, that was sort of redundant, so we're breaking it up. And then for those people that, couldn't make one of these and want to be an attending person, or we would expect that there may be some changes in the budget because of input from the community, we'll have another budget town hall on September 13th at 6 p.m. just to go over all of it. Then on September 21st, the board will adopt the budget to be included in the AGM packet for the members. And then October 29th, we'll be having the AGM on which the membership will vote on the budget and hopefully ratify whatever is placed in the packet. So that's the schedule of what's in front of us for the budget process. So just briefly, the vision statement. So this is what guides us. It's the overarching goal of the Semiyama board and the general manager and hopefully the community, is that Semiyama will be the premier residential resort community in the Pacific Northwest. And that's a heavy lift. There's a lot of big communities out there, so we have certainly have some competition. And then more specifically, how would we get there? The board's mission statement: we're going to enhance, preserve the natural beauty, harmonious design, quality of life, and sense of community in Semiyama. And we're going to do that by maintaining the assets for safety, beauty, durability, and environmental compliance, communicating regularly and openly with our members, managing funds in a responsible, sustainable manner, enforcing our rules, procedures, and covenants, and planning for the future with strategic initiatives and capital improvements. So one of the things we wanted to do is, before we get into the 2023 budget, talk about some of the things that happened this year. The board wanted to strengthen its management team, and so they went out and found a GM, that's me, and also found an excellent director of maintenance in Dan Rudolph, who happens to be a member, but just a hardworking, a really talented individual. I've worked with numerous maintenance directors, and Dan is definitely the top of my list. He's the best, I think, that Semiyama could hope for, or a general manager like myself. So some of the accomplishments, and again, this will be up on the web, so you can look at this, just what we have accomplished this year and what we plan to accomplish by the end of the year. There's a lot of maintenance that's been done. There's a lot of improvements, and I think that especially by the end of the summer and going into the end of this year, people will recognize. I lost my mouse. Okay, there. So how do we prepare this operating budget? It's quite a process. And again, this is the first year I've been at Semiyama. I've done many budgets in the past for other communities, but it's kind of the same thing. It's you got to make the sausage somehow. And you start generally with looking at all the financials from the prior year, and the maintenance director and I got together quite a bit to put in historical information, what we've spent, forecasting what we think we're going to be doing next year. We met with the maintenance committee a couple of times to try to hammer some of these things out, especially on the maintenance side. I acquired a new board member, and who actually, for the first time in my 24-year history, someone actually wanted to be the treasurer, and it wasn't some default position that was forced upon them. Jim Fitzsimmons joined in June, just in the nick of time, I believe, and just been a great addition to this process and to the board. So Jim and I met many, many hours. We met with the finance committee twice. We met with a subgroup at least twice to put together the budget we're going to be presenting today. So many hours of time and effort went into doing this. Obtained market competitive salary data for our employees, something I had done in previous assignment, and we also looked at other HMOs, looked at their views, just to compare and see where we were at with other communities. So that was kind of the process. I would say that it was a good 2.5 months in developing this budget, many hours. Capital budget, the same thing, but we did have help of the maintenance committee on that one as well. And also reserve analysts, we battered this one around for weeks and weeks. A lot of detail and information went into developing the capital budget and the reserve study. And we're going to do this, and you'll see all of that in its gruesome detail on Tuesday. Really hard to cover everything in the operating budget and in the capital budget in a single setting. So we're going to do that on Tuesday. So hopefully all of you can join then as well. If you can't, we're going to record it. And then again, we'll go over all of that stuff on the 13th. But also another thorough process. We also, as I mentioned, we formulated a 10-year long-range plan. This was one of the things that was discussed even before I was hired. It's just a desire of the board to put one of these together. So we did that. A lot of help from Jim Fitzsimmons again assisted in this. And so we did that. We put something together to give us a sense of what the community assessments will look like and the long-term planning for maintenance would look like for about 10 years out. And this also was reflected in the reserve study. And so that's what you also see that planning in that document as well. We did discuss that with the finance committee. They had some excellent input into especially inflation calculations and forecasts, which makes a huge difference whether you're talking, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars over 30 years, whether you're at 3% inflation or 5 or 7, makes a huge difference. So they were instrumental in helping us put that together. So yeah, a team effort all the way around in all of these budgets that we put together. So after doing all this work, what did we see? What jumped out at us and what did we need to address? One of the big ones in looking at salary compensation surveys was that our staff needs to be brought up to market, that we have some work to do there. And that helps us minimize turnover. And that's one of the things that I noticed when I first got here is our personnel files, how deep they were and how few of those people were actually here. And over the last few years, we've had a lot of turnover, and it's just not a recipe for success in any organization when you have that kind of turnover with as few employees as we have. It's one thing if you're at Amazon and you lose, a few employees, but we only have a few to begin with. So that was one of the things that was noticed off the bat. An unsustainable reliance on volunteers to administer and enforce CC&R's architectural standards and compliance. This is not just at Semiahmoo. The last assignment I had down in Shelter Bay and LaConner, very similar and very difficult to try to find volunteers to do the heavy lifting, the work that needs to be done every day, relying on volunteers to basically have a part-time or full-time unpaid position in the organization. One of the things that I noticed when I first got here, compared to previous assignments that I've had, is that many people may be familiar with the board addressing deferred maintenance, but one of the things the membership is probably not aware of is some of the same issues you could find within the administration. Our digital records, policies, procedures, guidelines, standard operating procedures, planning documents, best practices, just not really here or well developed. So that's something we need to focus on. These are soft costs, but it definitely does take time, effort, and personnel. Definitely need to continue pursuing and fixing deferred maintenance issues. This is a multi-year effort, and that is reflected in our long-term plan and in the reserve study and the upcoming, we'll see later, the reserve assessments. So this does not fix itself overnight, and so it's going to take us a few years. We're looking at some of those maintenance activities like help in the landscaping department. We generally don't do landscaping 12 months of the year at the level you do in the midsummer. So hiring some of that out to professionals does make sense as a smart use of capital. Aging infrastructure, you've heard about this. We've got some required replacements. We have to do some preventative annual maintenance. Gates, especially this year, was over budget on that. Just nothing we could do about it. The gates were in such poor condition that they just needed attention, and we're not done. That's going to extend into next year. Inadequate reserve capital, the fund long-term capital requirements, that was revealed in the reserve study that we've done. And that was recently delivered to the board, and I believe that's on the website now. Need for a long-term forecasting tool. So we talked about that. So these were the things that we found that were needed when we started to do our analysis of this 2023 budget. And I minimize this. Hold on 1 second, folks. I'll get rid of this. Just want to try to, or since we're recording this, I want to try to make sure that I can get rid of this bar up here. Steve, you know how you do that?
You pull it down to the side, I think.
It's not showing on our screen.
It's not.
I
Okay.
don't on our screen.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right. Sorry about that. Just want to make sure that the recording is clean and it's not encumbered by things I'm seeing. Thank you. So the 2023 long-term budget, excuse me if I can see this again, budget objectives. And so the development 2023 budget, 1-year, 10-year plan. Bring COLA, cost of living adjustments and market rate adjustment for staff. Reflect a solid preventive maintenance and improvement plan, improve the aesthetics, preserve critical infrastructure. Continue catch up on deferred maintenance, again, improving aesthetics, significantly improve landscape maintenance. It's something where there's a goal. Add dedicated ASC compliance staff to try to do the work that is currently being done by many of the volunteers on the ASC and by the ASC chair. Recognize and properly reflect inflation impacts. Everybody should be aware by at this point that there's some inflation out there and it's running higher than it has for many years. So nothing that we can run away from. It's going to have to be incorporated into the budget. Improved communications, something that was a board goal in 2021. We need to get the newsletter out there. We want to improve our website and the way in which we communicate to the community. And increase annual restricted reserve assessments to fully fund update long-term capital assessment maintenance and improvement plan. And then we have a few things out there that we are looking into, trying to get our arms around, but at this point are still elusive, but could be significant expenditures for the community in the future. So Boundary Ridge stormwater drainage situation, I think many people are aware of what happened there in November. We've been working hard on that this year. Drayton Harbor bioswale, that access, and Drayton Harbor recreation reason as well to be included. So once we did all of that investigation and we ran the numbers, we came up with a administration budget that looks like this. It is an increase, 24% overall. You can see some of the numbers there. You see some in IT and services, land use and engineering, salaries and benefits, legal. You can see the increases sort of across the board there. So let's look at those a little more closely. Operation and spending increase in this budget is $229,000, or a 25% increase. Much of that, $170K in personnel spending. That's 74% of the entire budget increase in for SRA in the operating budget. And much of that is the additional hire plus cost of living adjustments and bringing employees up to industry standard and what we're seeing out in the market. This would include a increase in salary for all staff except the GM January 1st, and then possibly an increase for the GM mid-year if the board sees that he deserves it. Professional fee increases, $26,000. That's 11% of the total increase. That we see an increase in the need for legal fees, land use and engineering to address those possible financial threats we just discussed here just recently. And those are Boundary Ridge stormwater, Drayton Hillside bioswale and access, and Drayton Harbor recreational easements. So we know we're going to need some legal assistance and some engineering on all of those.
And I think it's important to state that those threats are not going to go away.
Mhm.
Those are threats that SRA has to get their arms around and deal with over the course of the next year to 2 years.
And I think it's a good time to point out too, Doug, that Boundary Ridge stormwater, there's other than the soft costs that have gone, some engineering and legal, any construction cost is not included in this budget. That's something we don't know what that is yet. And so when we do know, we will definitely let the members know. We don't have a plug number there. One of the things also that we wanted to do is increase some expenditure on an audit firm. We don't believe we have a very comprehensive audit firm. And so we'd like to make sure that we have a good audit. And then also a new SRA website. I think many of the members probably agree, and I've heard can't find stuff there. We'd like to try to bring the website up to a standard that might be similar to that of the resort or the golf club, and make those entities seem a little more seamless. So that was the admin budget. And this is the maintenance budget. And you can see overall increase in maintenance would be 29%. See the different line items there. And so let's go into the highlights, some of those. You got $27,000 increase in maintenance, 12% of the total increase that if you include personnel. We're going to catch up on critical stormwater system maintenance. We point out some catch basins with some video camera scoping to be done. Much of this has not been done in many, many years. And we know that we have some issues that we need to address. Extend irrigation to areas that are lacking. Many of the gates, some of them have landscaping, some of them do not. It's kind of a patchwork, and I'd like to try to get some consistency there. Deferred tree care. There's quite a few common areas that SRA is in charge of, and many of those do have some issues with trees that need to be taken care of. Again, I think we had $1,000 in the budget last year. We were through that easily in the first couple of months of the year. So just not an adequate amount of money in the budget last year. And there's a lot of need out there. You have noticed a lot of trees are dying in Semyon and all throughout Whatcom County because of the last few summers. So we continue to see that and continuing, I think, in the future. So continue landscape upgrades. And we have some higher equipment care and repair expenses, fuel, inflation again affecting many of those things, street sweeper. So we've had to include that in the budget as well. So we talked about some expenses and how they've affected the budget, but there's also another item in the budget. You might not think about this often, but it also has a profound effect on the budget and the assessments. And that is miscellaneous income. And if you can see in 2022, ASC income and other income, it's money that's from transfer fees, from sales. We had some pretty large budget numbers in there in 2022 and trying to predict, what was going to happen. Well, we have not seen those numbers come to fruition. Many of the housing started down. We have fewer sales happening, fewer plan reviews that are coming into ASC. Many of what we're working on now, and the workload is from what was originally turned in 2020 and 2021. So when you see that decrease of 60% in ASC income and then 28%, it has an effect on the assessments. The expenses are determined, and then they are offset, or we match the assessment, the HOA assessments, and miscellaneous income. So when miscellaneous income goes down, the assessments have to cover that difference. So what we're looking at is the increase, the effect of that decrease in miscellaneous income has an effect on the operating assessment. And the operating assessment has to go up 17% because we're going to be collecting $47,000 less in miscellaneous income than what we had budgeted the prior year. So sometimes that you always think of the assessment number being driven explicitly by expense, but that's not true. Miscellaneous income does have an effect as well. So this is, if nothing changed, this is what the budget would look like in the AGM. You can see your revenues on the top and the change there. Maintenance, administration, the SRA building, total expenses, and then what would be the projected surplus or deficit. So that's just really rendering this, what we've just gone over down into its the simplest terms and sort of what you'd be seeing at the AGM.
David, can I just underscore, can you go back to that slide, just underscore a point you made that I just think it bears repeating. So the operating spending budget is going up 25% over last year's budget. But almost 75% of that increase is explained by a couple of things. We're hiring a new hire in the ASC area, compliance individual, and we're endeavoring to bring all SRA employee compensation up to market. We're not going to quite get there, but we're going to get a lot closer than we are right now. So 75% of the budget increase is explained by those two things. We're making one new hire and we're raising all salaries to get them closer to market. Sometimes things aren't simple, but in this case, quite a bit is explained by, you know, a couple of things that we're doing. So.
Okay, yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Jim, because there's a lot of numbers here and it seems kind of complicated, but I always appreciate when someone can bring some simplicity. So this is kind of a busy slide, but I think probably all of you have done these budget presentations for years, and everybody's always interested in what it means to them. And so if you are a one-bedroom villa or you're a condo of 1,400 square feet or a lot with a home, or, you know, whatever one of those categories you're in, you just can see what's happening with the assessments. And what we have is 2022 operating assessments, and then the 2023 operating assessment, and then what that increase looks like. Then we have the restricted reserve assessment and 2022, 2023, and what the increase, the reserve study is recommending. And then the cumulative in that next column, 2022, 2023, and the total increase. And then you'll see the annual increase. So I know you'll want to be able to see that. It seems like a lot of information there, but everybody will want to zoom in on what particular lot value you have there. So one of the things, and I mentioned this, with that, you'll see the yearly increase in the next slide. You can kind of see what this means on a monthly basis, depending on whether you have a one-bedroom villa, a lot with a home. The increase per year is in the first column, and the monthly increase is in the second column there. So you can kind of see how that affects your monthly budget for what we're talking here. So many may be thinking, how do we compare to other community associations in the area? So we did a little environmental scan, and this is what we came up with. And you can see this is what Birch Bay, Sudden Valley, and Shelter Bay are currently charging their members. I'm sure that they're looking at their budgets for the year. I can tell you that Shelter Bay is on a fiscal year, July 1 to June 30th. So that is their budget for this year. And so these are just some comparisons to let you know where Semiahmoo is in the proposed budget at $136 a month for a lot of the home, $1,636 a year, ranks with the rest of the community associations in there. And
So David, I just got a question, and maybe you can point this out to us. Semiahmoo has different amenities than Birch Bay, than Sutton Valley and Shelter Bay. So are these numbers that you're showing here normalized to reflect really what is a commonality between the communities?
Yes.
yeah, I believe so. And even I'm very familiar with Shelter Bay. As you know, I managed it for 8 years before coming here. And doing those numbers, we pulled out because Shelter Bay provides water and sewer utilities. Those numbers were pulled out of the reserve assessment because that's the way we pay for them. But I have to say one thing about Shelter Bay that's different. The marina there contributes $500,000 into the general fund every quarter. So these numbers would be much higher at Shelter Bay if it wasn't for a cost center that actually contributes money to the community, to the general fund, to the assessment. So their assessments would be higher.
As another example, Doug, Bay Village has a community pool and a 9-hole golf course, But if a resident there wants to use those services, they pay more than $135. Just as a Semiahmoo resident who wants to play golf at the golf course pays, for the golf course. So we have tried to normalize that.
And I do know that Shelter Bay's, their monthly capital assessment went up to $200 a month because of ignoring deferred maintenance for so long. And it was just a difficult thing. The community did not want to do that. I know Sudden Valley has many of the same issues. Some people probably on the call, others might be familiar with Sudden Valley, and they've ignored much of their capital planning for many years, and it's left them in a bad position. So the 10-year forecast. So one of the things that, again, Doug was very much from the even before I was hired, saying this is something that we really need to do in order to give the members an idea of where the association will be in terms of its finances for not just this year, because I think that's what mainly has been presented to the community at each annual meeting is here's the budget for next year, or here's the budget for next year. And so there was a desire to try to do more than that, to try to give the membership an idea as to what these assessments will look like into the future. And again, this is, I can provide anybody with any information, all the detail you want. We can get into the spreadsheets and go and dive deep, but there's some assumptions that you have to look at in here. And what we did was we followed the same inflation assumptions as that are in the reserve study, both in capital spending and in the operating. There are some changes here, again, as Jim had mentioned, not trying to get everything done in 1 year, but some additional increases in 2024 and the way we're going to be doing business. But then you get a sort of a flattening. I think this is just for the operating side. And then this is what it would look like if you were to include the capital spending as well. This is what your assessments would look like moving forward from 2023 out to 2032, applying for the first couple of years, 23, 24, 25 at 7%, and then 3% from there on. That's the best guess that the finance committee and the treasurer and the manager, that's what we came up with. As you know, that's a difficult thing to predict, but this is a living document. We'll update it every year. When we see inflation doing something different, we will. When we see some maybe changes in operations or capital spending, we'll make those changes. And so this will be updated every year. But one of the things that you do, a takeaway from this exercise was that you're not going to see this continued increase in spending, because that's many of you on the call might be going, our assessment's going to go up 25% a year. Not in our estimation that yes, there's this period of catch up and the deferred maintenance and trying to bring the organization up to a sustainable level and standard that is commensurate with the mission statement and vision statement, and to try to provide Semiahmoo, SRA, and the members with the service level and maintenance level that they desire. So this is what that exercise was designed to do, and I think it kind of put some of us at ease, is because that's what the numbers say. It's kind of like reaching cruising altitude. You got to kind of go steep incline, and then you sort of level off. And that's what this would look like graphically.
I think it's important too, as you look at the 10-year plan, it isn't necessarily a spending plan. It's a more building the savings account so that in the future, when we have those larger chunks of expenditures, we've got the capital set aside. So our plan, if you go up one slide, David, our plan looks nice and even, and from year to year, it increases fairly evenly and stuff. But what will happen is that spending becomes a little bit lumpy 1 year versus another year. And so I think it's important that we keep that in mind as we look at what our 10-year forecast is really all about. We can only see clearly maybe 3-4 years ahead.
Even then, it's difficult. Okay. To sort of recap, and because there's a lot to just try to digest there, you know, what are the main drivers of this 2023 budget? So what we have, as Jim said, 74% of the budget increase is really staff related. It's a one additional new hire, and it's bringing the current employees to closer to market level in compensation. We're going to be moving towards and look at the full extent, not just the operating budget, but the entire budget, including the reserves. We have a 95% increase of your reserve assessment. So that's 32% of the total increase. So that when I showed you that monthly chart, that can be just attributed to increase in reserves. Yeah, decrease in
But
miscellaneous.
before we go to the next one though, David, on increasing year over year our reserves, does that bring us into 100% funding throughout our plan?
No, it does not. It takes a long time to get to 100% funding. With this 100% funding, we chose an assessment that will eventually get us to 100%, but it takes almost the full 30 years to get there. I mean, there are more aggressive.
Stated a little differently might be more clear. If we continue to assess at the rate that is proposed, we will be fully funded for the 30 years worth of maintenance we have to pay for based on our forecast. If you look 1 year at a time and say, are you 100%? No, you build to that. But over a 30-year period, by assessing at the rate we're proposing, and then there's an inflation to that every year, you will be over the 30-year period fully funded for everything that's in the plan to be done during that 30 year.
Yeah,
At the proposed costs.
it's important when we talk about reserve studies, when you talk about your funding level, we don't want to be below that 100% on, and that's a track that we're on to make sure we've got what we need over the years. So it's really important that we understand, because last year we dropped significantly below, I don't remember what the number was, but we dropped significantly below when we actually started to look into what our real reserve study was.
Well, it was even worse than that, Doug. The new reserve study, if we continue to assess at the rate we've been assessing, would predict that we go negative in 2024. In other words, by 2024, we don't have adequate capital to fund the 30-year plan. And each year we get further and further and further and further behind. So it was pretty dramatic. It wasn't just a little bit, it was dramatic. And that's all in the research study. You can see that and read it.
I was going to, and after your comment, Jim, thank you, I was going to mention that is that if people are on the call, you know, anyone who's a member thinks, well, can't we just keep the assessment we had for the current capital assessment? And the reserve study, as you mentioned, said we just go negative within the next couple of years. And you really can't operate in the negative. You can't get anything done. And that's a special assessment, which I don't think that people really would like to consider. So yeah, and that will be, we'll go over that in more detail on Tuesday evening, but in between now and then, people want to take a look at the reserve study and go through it. It would be advisable because there's a lot of information. So again, another big driver of what the increase was, just, you know, adequately funding our reserves. Again, as I've mentioned, you know, a big chunk of it too is we're looking at decrease in miscellaneous income. It just has a big effect on the assessment. Professional fees, you know, trying to get our arms around these land use and engineering issues that we have. We're going to, we just predict that there's going to be a need for that. I'd also throw in there too is there was I think a very robust response from the community when there were the two public meetings, both down at the resort, regarding the Semiahmoo Highlands and the Inverness meetings. Inverness will be coming online at some point. So will some multifamily developments here in SRA, one at Prestwick Village, one at Carnoustie. those are going to require SRA to go out and get some professional help. Just so we make sure that these things are done correctly. We just do not have that expertise in-house.
Well, and to the decrease in miscellaneous income, although we see a decrease this year, probably for a lot of different reasons. Next year, we might, and the year after, we may see that really come back up, which may have an impact on what we decide next year our dues might have to be. Because if it comes back up, we won't necessarily have the same challenges we have this year.
Right. And I think Jim and I will put that in the long-term.
Yeah, in the long-term
This,
plan, we did actually assume that it rebounds
yeah, it will come
and
back.
gets back to more historic levels, but we clearly aren't there now, so there, it would be not responsible to project higher revenues when we're just not seeing
I'm
them.
not seeing it, yeah, but we did do that, Doug, and thinking on the lines of why, and when we looked, the first slide we looked at was that picture, that people are not going to stop coming here. Semi-hub is not going to become less popular. It's going to only increase. And we know, and we've heard from the city of Blaine, 2,000 units that they're planning on building. You know, it may not happen overnight. It may take 4, 5, 6, 10 years, but it's happening. It's coming. And so I think we're going to be seeing some of those things before we know it. Yes, Jeff.
Yeah, so I just want to just emphasize on professional fees. This is not consulting companies.
No,
This is very targeted expertise around a specific issue or problem that we're dealing with in the community. So it'll be very clear cut, very concise, and very tangible outcome that will help us address the boundary of stormwater or whatever it happens to be.
thank you for making that point and that clarification. And then you just look at the maintenance budget itself, continued to catch up on deferred maintenance for Dan and his crew. You know, there's if you take labor out, it's a 9.6% increase. You could almost attribute most of that to inflation, let alone just trying to catch up on deferred maintenance. And as I mentioned, inflation. You know, we know that's a driver of the budget. We can't get away from it. Everybody's being affected by it right now. And the thought that our budget is immune, we can't get away from it. I'm sorry. So those are the main drivers we see. We render it down, as Jim said, to try to simplify it. This is what is happening in the budget. These are the main drivers of increases that we see. So a few take-home messages. I mean, all of us around this table understand that increasing is not popular. It's not something that it wasn't a goal. It wasn't what we started out to do. We just followed the numbers, and this is where they led us. And there's been a lot of thought and consideration in what it is that we really need to be successful. And this budget, I think, reflects that. So yeah, it was these numbers are not put together without that thought in mind and foremost in mind. We see that they're consistent. These dues right now are not on line with other HOAs. And the board recognizes, and I do as well, this is up to the community to determine what it is, whether you accept this budget or not, whether we need to change it. But we're presenting what we feel is the best budget to address Semi-Ahmo and its needs and to make sure that it's successful into the future. We've gotten to that point of questions and discussions.
Would you like me to go through the chat questions first?
Or any preference, people that are online or chat questions, or you want to just take some here and there?
Let's just
Mix it up?
alternate.
Alternate, yeah.
I'll start with the chat.
Let's do a chat, Justine.
The first question is the Boundary Ridge storm water issue one and the same with the seasonal drainage issue?
Good question. So the question was, is the Boundary Ridge drainage issue the same as the seasonal?
No, it's seasonal.
Seasonal, oh.
I'll answer that as well as I can. The Boundary Ridge flooding is catching a lot of water that comes through sea smoke, that comes off of sea smoke. But I don't believe much of that water is coming out of the existing residential piece. Now, it could be that some of that is going down, hitting a hard pan and rolling into the ditch to the west. But most of it is coming a little bit south and east. There's about 90 acres of drainage basin that drains into the ditch right out here in front of SRA office building. That goes under Semiahmoo Drive and enters the first catch basin on the Boundary Ridge stormwater system. And it overpowers on a big storm, it overpowers the system at that point. So we're talking with city, and we hope to have the ability to bring consensus between the city, the county, Sea Smoke Development, and SRA sometime in the near future, as far as what a path to resolution will be.
And if I might add to that, because if in the budget context, what does this mean to our budget and expenditures? Sea Smoke that community is a member of SRA, but there's also development that needs to happen there. And from what we understand, that if there is a diversion that can be negotiated with the city SRA and with Sea Smoke might be part of that negotiation, and it could be in their benefit. If we can get diversion and another outflow, it would benefit the developers to be involved in that project for their bottom line. So yeah, we will be engaged with the developers of Sea Smoke because it is in their best interest to make sure that this flooding doesn't happen again, and a diversion is completed. It's something that actually happens. So there is an economic incentive on their part to being part of that process. That's a good question. So can we have somebody that's in the audience that wants to speak? If you would, if you could name, give your name before you speak so we know who you are.
My name is Carol Snowball, and I live at the Pacific Point condominiums. And I'm curious I understand that all of you have put in a tremendous amount of effort and energy and expertise into putting together this budget and the future budgets. And I have lived in the Pacific Point condominiums for 1 year and a couple months. And I'm curious, what do you do for us? For the Pacific Point. You know, we're at the very end of the spit, and all the extra services that I see you providing, we're not a part of that. So can you please explain what you do, what you do for the condominiums? Thank you.
I'll be happy to start out. Everybody has equal access to all of the resources and assets in the community. The Boundary Ridge Stairs, the parks, everything. Currently, there's a big parking lot in front of Pacific Point. There's some issues within our CCNRs that we feel need to change in order for us to be able to effectively maintain that parking lot and the lighting, the landscaping kind of around that. Currently, that's owned by the resort. The resort is a huge contributor to our budget every year. So there's some changes that we're anticipating, which will be outside of the budget discussion, but will be more along the lines of an equity discussion as we get to before the AGM. And it will be in terms of creating an amendment to our CCNRs that allow SRA to actually do the maintenance on some of the NHOA property, some of the resort property, like sweeping road repair, that sort of thing.
And we have done sweeping, snow removal. We'll continue to do those and probably do those even more. We did fix the lights down at the parking lot this year. Not necessarily a responsibility, but one in which our maintenance department provided that service for the parking lot area this year.
Steve, I would add the entire Pacific Point project required ASC review and monitoring, which took a lot more time than a typical submission does because of its size and complexity. And in addition, there's a lot of background work that's done. So an immense amount of work has gone into and will continue to go into dealing with the development around us, both the developments in Semiahmoo, which affect everyone in the community because of the appearance, the standards that are set, and the fact that to get to Pacific Point, you've got to drive through the Semiahmoo community and you see what it looks like. And then also a good deal of work goes into monitoring the non-SRA developments like Semiahmoo Highlands. That's hours of work for the staff that serves everyone in the community and isn't seen. I mean, it's very easy to understand how that is not recognized as an important part of what the SRA provides, but it provides a large voice in terms of dealing with the development around us.
I will also say that maintenance of the Semiahmoo brand, which includes all of us, is another big piece of that, which includes the resort, includes the marina, includes the golf course, and 27 different residents, HOAs. Maintenance of that brand is critical to all of us within Semiahmoo. So.
Thank you for your question. Can we have one from the chat again?
Lauren Ellis asked, with the increases, what do they get for at Marin Condo?
That was Pacific Point and
That was a follow-up question to, that was also in the chat.
so Marion, let's see, Pacific Point. And who was, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear,
Marin,
who was the owner?
Lauren Ellis.
One second. I think it's basically the same question, but just a different property that's right next door to what you just heard. And that this is been a question that's been coming from the folks on the spit. I've not been here that long, but equity has been an issue that has been plaguing Semiahmoo for 30 years. And there is a document we'd like to be able to put out on the web if it's not already there. That was done at an annual meeting 30 years ago in 1993, that if you just changed out the dates, you would see that it could be a document that could be written today. So that's something that the organization here is working on, trying to determine what it is that is fair for all members and how to try to make this community a community that people don't feel as though that we have two questions from two properties right next door that are almost identical, to try to address those concerns. So it's not as though that this is not being looked at and what is it that we can do, but I can tell you that there's been quite a bit of time spent by this board looking into that question. So.
And I would just add to that, I'm new to the board. I've been on the board since June. From almost the day I got here, I heard that there is a perception of an equity issue. And what I can say is that I've observed a board and been a part of a board that takes that very seriously and wants to try to do something about it, make it better. And Doug alluded to some things, some initiatives that are in work, but no one's placating this issue or trying to just swoop it away. I think people genuinely are wrapping their arms around how to make it better for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's genuine. There's no doubt about it.
the fact that it's been an issue for 30 years and it hasn't been solved, I think gives some weight to the fact that it's not an easy problem. If it was an easy nut to crack, it would have been cracked a long time ago. So this is something that, again, as Jim said, since I've been here, this is being discussed, it's being looked at, what can we do? And so we appreciate your questions and your concerns, and please keep them.
I'll just say just add one thing to that, and that is that I believe that what should occur next year, not this year, because we just don't have the bandwidth to deal with it, but put together a study group, a community-based study group that includes Spit people, resort people, and the uplands, all of the representation, and get together and really study what the path may be towards rectifying the sense of equity issue. I don't know that that's an easy issue to get your arms around based on our governing documents, but we all have to live by them. So,
and I would say, and you did mention it, but just to make sure everybody's clear, that our resort partner has expressed the same, I think, sentiment here recently. It's just recently, it's just this last week. So it's not just the members that are in the condos in the state, it's actually the resort itself raising that issue. So they're not alone. Okay, I guess we have another person who is here joining us, one of the 46 that are online right now. Does anybody like to speak? And if you would, please say your name first so we know who you are.
Good afternoon. This is Dick Christie, and I live in Semiahmoo Shore. I'm curious, your assumption of inflation at 7.5% for 2023, 2024, and 2025. Anyone who's been watching the Federal Reserve with their quantitative tightening, the current and projected numbers that they have that have been reviewed by the Office of Budget Management, the International Monetary Fund, and the Federal Reserve themselves indicate that inflation should be pegged at just under 4% next year, under 3.5% in 2024, and then approximately 3% in 2025. 26 and on, if they get to their goal of 2%, which they've struggled with many, many times pre-COVID, that's neither here or there for today, but I think you might want to reevaluate 7.5%, because if you know something that these industries don't, we're in far more greater trouble than the Labor Department or the Commerce Department or anyone else is taking a look at. So I think that might be wise for you to relook at your assumptions for inflation, especially as you look forward to the 5, 10, 30-year budget projections that you've got. Thank you.
thanks, Dick.
Hey, you sound like you might have a finance background. We're always looking for people to join our finance committee.
Actually, I'm suffering from the stock market crash of yesterday after Fed Chairman Powell spoke, which
Wow.
if you can go, I mean, you can go back into the history of the Labor Department, the Federal Reserve, the Commerce Department, all arguing about which indices they want to use. But I just seems to me that with inflation having been in the news for the last several months, and the fact that the government may have missed the boat several months ago in starting their quantitative tightening, it just seems to me that there are things that are already out there that you could look at and take advantage of for your future planning going forward.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think for the 2023 plan, which is the operating plan, which is really the subject of discussion today, we did do a 10-year plan, and you're right. It's all assumption driven, so that can be revisited. But the real question is, what do we think will happen over the next 12 months, and what should we prepare this organization to have to endure? And 7.5 is kind of what we put in the plan. It can be questioned, but it seems like a fairly safe bet unless things change pretty quickly.
Yeah, and also just one quick note, some of the, like the 7.5% actually came from our reserve analysts. Because that's what they're looking at, increases in project costs. So it's not like, it's not a consumer price index that they're looking at. They're looking at more of construction, which they see as having a higher increase. And so that, I'm not sure what index they were using, but that's what we used for the reserve study. So, but point well taken.
Well, it'd be good to know, because I mean, they may be using the producer price index for all I know. I just know that investors and the public view inflation as the CPI when it comes out. And then the feds want to take sides with the Commerce Department when it comes to the personal consumption expenses. And then I'm not sure how the producer price index plays in between the two of those and all the various departments. I only bring it up because it was interesting when the outside organizations took a look at this based on the current and projected interest rate increases between now and some point in time next year. They just focused on less than 4, less than 3.5, and settling on 3. And it struck me funny when I read the charts before today's meeting that I thought, wow, where are they getting those numbers from? That's all. That's just my point.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for your question. It's a good one, and we'll definitely be looking at that as we go through this year and we prepare for next year as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Chat, Dustin.
With the new ASC compliance officer, shouldn't there be revenue generation to justify it for applying?
That's a good question. Yeah.
JB Palin.
Yeah, so with that one, I'd love to take that one.
He's got his hand up too.
Having come from 2 other communities and coming here just recently to Semiahmoo, I had a really hard time understanding the complexity of the enforcement sections of the covenants. It is extremely difficult to find a member here as compared to other properties that I've worked at. And so, yeah, it's a very good question. We are going to have as a resolution, I believe, if the board so chooses, at this AGM, a resolution to the covenants, an amendment that would change the way in which we enforce the process of enforcement. And currently what has to happen is there's this long process of sending letters. And then once you've determined that this person has actually violated or has responded, then ASC may, or the manager may recommend to the board to find that individual. Then there has to be a hearing. So there has to be a notice sent to the member to have a hearing. So you have to have a hearing before you can fine, which is really exactly the opposite of every property I've worked in most HOAs. Generally, a citation is given, the person either pays it or they don't. It's a revolving fine, so maybe it's $100, and the next week it's another $100, and another week. So there's this monetary incentive for people to come into compliance. So that monetary incentive does the work for you. Right now, here at SRA, it's a lot of staff time. It requires the board to have a hearing before a fine can even be placed. So we are just going to put in front of the membership, I hope, an amendment that would align SRA more, I guess, with other communities and best practices when it comes to covenant compliance, rules and regulations compliance, and to let the monetary penalty or the threat of do a lot of the work. And so I know just since I have been here, we have been inundated in many weeks with requests from members for compliance issues, and we do our best to follow this process, but it is so bureaucratic that it almost never results in fine. So Steve, would you like to add to that?
Well, a couple of facts. The submittal fee for new construction was increased by 50% last year for this year, and we're proposing another 11% increase for next year. It was completely inadequate to cover the actual salary costs associated with doing the reviews. The other point is that at least half of the work of this compliance officer is not related to architectural standards. There are many community rules that are at risk for violation that have nothing to do with architectural standards. And right now, we have no one in the organization whose primary obligation or responsibility is to take care of compliance of non-architectural standard issues. So it's very likely, as David said, the combination of improving the process and having someone whose primary responsibility is to see that it works is very likely to increase the revenue associated with compliance and ASC activities.
Yeah. A very good question, one obviously close to Director Haynes and my heart. So yeah, hopefully we will have that in front of the membership at this next AGM. That'd be my hope anyway. Okay, so then we need somebody from the audience again, I think.
Us in the comments.
Okay. Buzz, are you wanting to speak?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'd like to go back for a moment to the whole conversation we had about the proposed CCNR change with regard to taking over a lot of maintenance.
Mhm.
Where is that reflected in the budget?
Let's see, Buzz. I can say that right now, as far as I can tell, and I've done we've had Justine doing a bunch of research, so has Director of Maintenance myself. SRA has been maintaining, say, the gates for as long as there have been gates. So that would be right now, we have, I think, $11,000 in service calls on gates, all gates. I don't see any evidence that SRA has billed back to the individual NHOAs that cost. Same with, it costs $250 a month for the software that runs all gates. Every gate has a phone line that costs $70 a month that actually communicates with the software so you can get in and out. So none of those things, just gates in general, have we ever billed to an NHOA. So I think one of the things is we want the documents to match the way we are doing business. It's sort of easier that way than to make the way we do business match the documents, because if anybody can tell me what these documents say is responsibility. I mean, some seem to be clear, some are ambiguous, some are silent. So I think much of what, if that change goes through, would be reflected in this budget, but especially the reserve budget.
Yeah, it's most impactful in the topic we're going to have in the next town hall, which is the long-range capital budget. Because the budget and the assessments that David alluded to today that we will be discussing at the next town hall.
Can you clarify then for me, Jim? Will we on Tuesday see what the financial impact of this is going to be on the association?
Well, you can get a sense for some of it, the longer range, by looking at the expense assumptions modeled over the 30 years in the long range capital plan, because those basically capture all activity that's required and don't make an attempt to delineate what is SRA versus a neighborhood. The costs are captured. The assessment to do it all is captured. And if it goes through, that will be consistent with the change in clarifying what SRA does. So if you're looking for where it most has the financial impact, it would be on the long range capital reserve spending rather than on the operating spending.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
In the reserve study, Buzz, and this is really interesting too. The previous reserve study, which when I got here, people said, I mean, there were no folks, it's not worth the, paper and ink that went to put it together. But you look at that reserve study and it also included all gates and for replacement, for gates, for posts, for controllers, all of that. So no one previously sliced and diced it to try to decide whether Erie or Crestwood Village or, Semiahmoo Shores or any of them were an SRA responsibility or the NHO responsibility. They were just poured in there. So when the maintenance committee and maintenance director and I sat down and we really worked on this reserve study, the inputs into it, and hats off to Dave Whitmore and the work that he did. A topic or a subject that has not been solved in the last 30 years, we figured the three of us, that was not in the scope of work. So we put together, we identified all the assets, we figured out what their cost was, the replacement cost, what was their useful life, what was the remaining useful life, and what was the replacement cycle. And I think we have the best data, much better than the previous one. And so that's all captured in this reserve study. But as far as I can tell, I'm trying to get some more information on everything that went into the prior reserve studies, which the reserve assessment has been based on over the last 3-4 years. I do know all the gates are in there. I'm looking into pavement and other assets, but I'll let you know on that one. But we'll go into more detail on the reserve and stuff, Buzz, on Tuesday.
It might be best to just re-ask this question when all that information has been presented. And then maybe there'll be a better understanding of that.
Well, I think also too, if I understand Buzz's question correctly, we'd have to sit down and really go through the budget with a fine-tooth comb in order to determine how much of that is being performed on NHOA property versus, versus what is called for in the CCNRs. Because that is something that got reinforced last year in the CCNRs. And it's a real point of challenge from a management perspective to be able to understand where all that is without doing a pretty deep dive on 27 different communities, plats, CCNRs versus the SRA CCNRs. It's a big, big project. So one of the reasons that we're suggesting that we make an amendment to the CCNRs so that we can get rid of that cloud. Been going on, as David mentioned, been going on for 30 years.
I'll
Thank you for
be
that.
happy. I'll be happy to if you revisit this whole subject on Tuesday when we can actually look at the numbers, because I do believe that it's important with an important change like this that the membership can get a clear understanding of what the impact is going to be financially. I think there will be other impacts that probably will have to be considered, but Tuesday will be more. I hear you say.
Yeah, and Buzz, just to be clear too, on Tuesday, we're going to be talking about and speaking directly about capital, the reserve study. So as Jim mentioned, that's a big chunk of this, for that change. On the 13th, I would hope that and I think your question is, how would this change affect our operating budget? I think it will take more time between now and Tuesday for me to provide, information to you that's somewhat accurate, or I would be comfortable. Because is that your question? How would that change affect next year's operating budget?
No, I really meant what I said. Where is it reflected in the budget? And what I hear you say, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's all in there. It's on the capital side. And
Yes.
therefore, if the amendment passes, there is not a significant impact on assessments down the road.
You got a preview today to what the assessments are doing next year. And you got a sense over the long range of what they're doing. And so the increase in the restricted reserve assessment reflects a spending plan that is paid for primarily by SRA. So you've already been previewed to the financial benefit by looking at what David presented today, but we can certainly get more detailed about it when that is the topic next meeting. But it primarily affects the amount of money everybody's paying into the reserve account, because that's where most of the spending that SRA is going to handle shows up that is relevant to this topic, I think.
Other than, let me just make one point. So Jim's right. Everything is in there in the reserve study. So if it's gate controllers, gates, posts, all of that stuff, capital improvements. What's not in the operating budget would be if we decide that SRA is responsible for the inside and outside of every gate. We currently have the budget that we built in 2023. It's relatively status quo. Now, Semiahmoo Shores, for instance, SRA is supposed to take care of their landscaping, but there's some trepidation on their part to allow Semiahmoo to do that, but it is something that we're supposed to do. Boundary Ridge, from what I understand, interior of the gate is done by Boundary Ridge. So to make it equitable, would we have SRA, if this passes, take care of all interior and exterior gates? The benefit to that would be that you would have more consistency, you'd have more equity, and that we would manage that. Now, I know there has been maybe some mistrust of whether or not SRA can handle that, but that's why you have a new management team. We want to make sure that this operation works efficiently. I think we can take advantage of economy of scale, a singular management group. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of that, Buzz, because it's a very good question. It's all inclusive in the reserve study and the operating budget. It's not so much.
And one last point, the impact, whatever that is on the operating budget, won't be known completely until the details of what SRA is going to do and not going to do are worked out. And if you listen to our board meeting earlier this week, one of the assignments is to get a group together and get that list finalized. Until that list is finalized, we wouldn't be able to tease out of the budget how that affects or doesn't, because we need to know what, on an annual maintenance perspective, we need to know what will and won't be done. So we will be able to answer that question ultimately, but not until we know exactly what the scope of the change in terms of workload actually ends up being.
Will that be before the AGM, before the voting starts, or only afterwards?
Oh,
No,
no,
that's a good
have
question.
to be before. Well, you have to know what you're voting on,
I think it
Buzz.
would have to be before.
It really has to be before the next board meeting.
Yeah.
So
So we have some time, but yeah, we'd have to nail that down. And if that meant some slight modifications to the budget that we've discussed today, then that would have to be factored in.
Understood.
Great. Excellent question, Buzz. Thank you very much. Okay, let's do a chat, Justine.
Okay, Mike Klaus, were there any areas where economies or efficiencies were found? Mike,
Economies of scale or efficiencies while constructing the 2023 budget. I think we were just speaking about some of those, but those have not yet to come to fruition. It sort of depends on the membership and some work that we're trying to do here and trying to develop a comprehensive list of maintenance responsibilities for SRA. Yeah, I would think that if each NHOA had its own landscaping company, it wouldn't be nearly as efficient as if SRA had a contract with a single landscaping company that we could do an RFP to and get a number of different larger landscaping companies and try to drive that price down. I mean, that's one of the things that we're trying to look at. And one of the benefits that SRA could lend to all of the NHOAs and everyone in Semiahmoo is taking advantage of those economies of scale. So Mike, it's something we're going to work on. It makes sense to do that. But one of the problems that we have, here's what we were just speaking about, is the patchwork, the uncertainty of whose responsibility. And complexity is more difficult to manage and more costly to manage than simplicity. And I'm always driving towards simplicity. It's just easier and less expensive to manage. But that's a very good question. We're always going to be looking for those kind of benefits, productivity, efficiencies, something we're always going to look for.
I'll just add, Mike, that I think a good example would be outsourcing landscape maintenance. We don't have a staff here that has the equipment, the chemicals, the knowledge, the schedules, all of that landscape companies have, maintenance companies. And so by outsourcing our landscape maintenance, we can free up our staff, but also that cost gets done efficiently and it gets done well. And I think that's probably one of the points that I'm really anxious to get put in place is our landscaping outsourced to a really great dependable company that we can actually start to really see. So,
well, you don't have to, Doug, that's a good point. You don't have to carry those personnel costs in through the winter where you have much less activity. It just makes more sense to do, have special contract maintenance in those areas. If it was year round, that's a different story, but it's so seasonal that it makes sense to farm that out. So, okay. Another.
Joseph Chu is next.
is that?
Joseph Chu.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry to get in on this, and this whole conversation has been aggravating. I live at Pacific Point, and I'm down on Spit, as you well know, and I looked at the PowerPoints that you put up and the accomplishments for 2022, and not one of them had anything to do with what affects me. And I believe in the common good, and so when I paid my assessment for 2022, I guess, or whatever it was, I bit my tongue and just went forward. After being here now a year and seeing what you guys did, I think it's great. And the people who live in the communities and the people with gates that are broken, got them fixed by you guys, and I paid for it. The landscaping you do up in the communities, it looks great, I'm sure, but I paid for it. And the parking lot you're talking about in front of the building, that's not our HOA's parking lot. I don't know whose it is. It's the resort's probably. So anything about that, I'm not that interested in. What am I getting? What am I getting for my money? And what am I getting for the now 30% increase next year? I mean, that's just that simple. What am I getting for my money? I think you should charge based on what is being a benefit to that HOA, not just flat rate across the entire HOAs. So can you answer my question? What am I getting for my money?
I think that goes back to the previous response we had to that same question.
It was an inadequate response to that.
Well, the problem
because it didn't tell me what I got.
Yeah. Well,
We told you some of the things you got, you just don't see value.
No. Tell me what I got that I got. There was nothing that you helped Pacific Point with.
Like I said, I think that the issue of equity is outside the realm of this discussion on the budget. There will be that discussion. I think, Joseph, it would be great for you to be involved in that. And we bring that up. But right now, the CC&Rs pretty much state what everything is. And that becomes a very, very big issue.
Right. And let me ask you this question. Why do we have to belong to this association? can we leave and go our own way?
It'd be
And
very.
because you
difficult.
said that complexity makes it difficult. If you had one less place to deal with, it'd be a lot easier and you wouldn't have people who don't feel like they're getting anything.
Yeah, and Joseph, so just to answer that question, you know, you just put, Pacific Point, Marion, they're all in the master plan. They're all part of the covenanted area. That are governed by the CCNRs. I mean, they are, an encumbrance on the property. They run with the land.
Right. Well, then I would suggest you give us some benefit to our funds instead of just taking our money and then using them for some other part of the development.
Well, and that's where, you know, there's no real room, and this is, so Joseph, the covenants can only be changed by the members. The board can't do it, I can't do it. So.
Well, how do I start this
there's-
process to change it then?
Well, that's what we're working on. So as Doug said, we invite you to get involved in that. I understand and I hear your frustration and I appreciate that. But it's something that has to be done by the membership and not by the board or the manager. It's just the way the place was built, and fairly or unfairly, and anybody's fine. But the only way to change it is to have the members do that. And that's what Doug was suggesting is, you know, and people that are, you know, have strong feelings about it and are affected by it should get involved in that process. But it's not something that we can change. It's just unfortunately built in.
I know there had been discussion about possibly getting our arms around that this year, but there with the staff turnover that we had and some of the other major projects that have come before us, we just haven't had the ability to dedicate time, staff to organize and get that started. But it is a priority for next year. And I would invite you, Joseph, to be involved in it.
I am very jaded as to your interest in doing this. And I will be surprised if you can get something done that makes it equitable based on what the services are that are provided for the individual HOAs. And I'll wait and see what you do, but it's unreasonable from what I've heard so far and seen in your budget and seeing what you've done for 2022 as accomplishments. I'm paying for something that I'm not getting, and I'm paying more next year for the same nothing.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your comments, Joseph. And hopefully we'll be talking to you here soon as far as part of a group. Justine?
Dave Whitmore asked, what are the consequences for not adding a compliance officer?
Well, it will not be able, we appear not to be able to continue having an ASC. We have contacted many people with appropriate interest, initial expressed interest and experience, and we've been unable to recruit. We've had to postpone 2 meetings this year so far for quorum issues. And if we don't have an ASC, nothing happens. You can't fix your house. Nobody can build a house. It's a terrible situation. And the problem isn't just the ASC. The problem is, as we mentioned before, that compliance has no administrative structure. And so over 30 years, all of the compliance issues have been pushed toward the ASC. So we're being asked about people's dogs biting other people and this sort of thing. And it has nothing to do with architectural standards, but it takes up the time of the ASC administrator, a lot of it. And we can only move ahead with an effective and functioning architectural standards committee, which is critical to maintaining the standards that make Semiahmoo what it is. If we have more staff help to do that work, the compliance work that's getting in the way of the ASC work, and because there's crosstalk between ASC activities and compliance activities, a person who functions in both areas makes a lot of sense. We could make a very strong case for both another ASC administrator and a compliance officer. We could make those people busy immediately, but we looked very carefully at trying to combine that into one position to be responsible about it.
And I think it's probably worth mentioning too, Dave, because that's a really good question. And what Steve was mentioning, we want to try to make volunteering at SRA enjoyable. And I know that you did some wonderful work on the maintenance committee. But from my experience with some of the ASC volunteers, they're doing a lot of work. They would like to do less. They'd be more inclined to volunteer. And we want to make volunteering at SRA a pleasurable experience for all of the members. And I've seen some of the workload that some of these people in this room have been willing to take on. And I'm not sure I would do that, but you know, that's one of the things we want to make sure.
It's much more than making it easier for the committee. It's critical that compliance activities and ASC monitoring activities are consistent over time. And when you change the committee, half the committee every 6 months, if you could, then it's very difficult to maintain that kind of consistency, particularly since the procedural infrastructure that David talked about at the beginning of the meeting isn't in place. The record keeping and so on has not been very good. That takes more staff time also, and we don't have the staff necessary to do that. So it's a matter of fixing the operation and being able to carry out most of its functions at the staff level with a committee that provides oversight and insight and community involvement in the process.
Dave, I just wanted to, Steve kind of got to where I was going to go, but I think it's important to understand that the ASC it's largely a volunteer-run operation, and yet it's critical to the functioning of this community. And I just don't think it's a sustainable model to continue into the future with basically a volunteer-run organization or function that brings into risk its functionality if we can't get volunteers to man it or person it. So having this person on board, I think the critical point is it's not only focused on ASC, it's compliance across the HOA, something that's been lacking. And I think it's an important part of where we need to go for our future development.
Just, David, give your experience that you had at Shelter Bay.
Yeah, quickly. At Shelter Bay, we had 11 committees. One was called the Lot Committee. Its responsibility was enforcement of the CC&Rs and rules and regs. It was a committee that was almost impossible to staff with volunteers because it was contentious. People didn't like, being involved in compliance issues and telling on their neighbors and those kind of things. So it basically fell apart while I was there, and I pleaded to the community that either we get volunteers or we're going to have to hire someone because we don't have the staff to be able to take care of these functions. And so no one stepped forward. So the committee basically dissolved. And so we hired a part-time compliance officer, and many people in the community were against that. Within a year, most of the community, that person had moved full-time out of part-time. And the gentleman was probably the most popular member of the staff. The person who became president was one of the people who was against that hire, and admitted in front of the whole community at a board meeting that he was absolutely wrong, and it was one of the best management moves that the board had made. So it's a success story that I'm personally familiar with, and you could see the difference in the community by having that person dedicated to that task. That person also ended up working and doing a lot of work for Shelter Bay's ACC, our Architectural Compliance Committee, same as AS, and doing all kinds of work, so doing site visits, looking into complaints that were orientated or specific. And so it was something that the community will not go back on. And it also fulfilled a fiduciary responsibility of the board of directors, which is to enforce the CC&Rs and the rules and regs. And what we saw was also, to Steve's point, a less arbitrary, capricious, and inconsistent adherence to the rules and regs and the enforcement. So yeah, that it was I think a very positive thing for Shelter Bay. Most people would say that to this day. Very good question, Dave. And I think one of the things too to maybe leave everybody with is, a little thought experiment. Kind of as keep on saying, just like It's a Wonderful Life. Imagine SRA without its architectural compliance committee or ASC. It would look different. If anybody could paint a house any color they want, or they could put up anything in their yard that they wanted, and there wasn't this strict adherence to standards, the community would look much different. So I know a lot of people don't have a positive view, unfortunately, of ASC, but they do a lot of good work. The volunteers are excellent, and but they need help. They need assistance. So thanks for that question, Dave. Who's next, Justine?
Steve Wilson.
Steve Wilson.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. Steve, how are you today?
Good. Can I suggest that one of the guiding principles for you in the list you have is equity? I've been talking to various members of the board here for the better part of a year about equity. I'm also in Pacific Point. I feel what Joe and Carol said, very much the same feeling. If we pay in, we get nothing out. And one thing I suggested, and I really, really strongly suggest, is that we start tracking maintenance costs by neighborhood, and also the reserve, the anticipated reserve costs by neighborhood, so that we can start seeing where the resources are actually being consumed and where resources are not being consumed. My community, it sounds like what we got was fixed lights last year. And for that, my building paid $18,000. And equity has to be a driving force for all of this, because it is not currently in the budget. As Joe pointed out, we got nothing from last year's budget. I see nothing in next year's budget that will benefit us, but now we're paying 40% more for it. So can we at least start tracking expenses by community? Because if we do the study group next year, as has been proposed, one of the biggest data points we're going to need for that is, where is the money being spent, what communities, and how much? So we can start trying to get some level of equity.
I'll respond to Steve, and that is that one of the things that we had in the budget that Finance Committee decided it was really better to put off for a year is software that would allow us to do that kind of accounting. But right now, we don't have the ability, especially with the staff limitations that we have, to do that kind of accounting.
Your maintenance guy can't just like write down what community benefited from what service when they make their log of the service calls they make.
I mean, Steve, we have that information. I mean, we can come up with estimates for sure.
Estimates are a good start. Let's start with estimates.
Yeah, no, I mean, for those discussions, we can come up with some estimates, but tracking to the penny right now, like Doug said, that'd be difficult. I know Dan's tracking the work. I mean, he's got a schedule. It's just sort of relaying that back to say, like, when we pay for some things that like when we pay for maintenance for all of the gates, how do we break it down into each one? I mean, we can come close. We can, I guess what I'm saying is,
Well, he knows when he does maintenance on a gate, and he knows what community that is.
Yeah, I mean, you guys don't have one, so that's a real easy, that, there's a zero that goes in.
Yeah, but we pay for it.
Yeah,
And you know, and I just want to add that we are aware that there is real concern over the equity issues down in the spit amongst the resort. I would like to, in this group, in this discussion, let's put that off because that's going to be an issue that's coming up. It's not going to help us get through this budget today. You know, because we can't change the CCNRs to change the way everything gets billed on a per unit basis. And I mean, it would be impossible.
I can't sit here and not make this comment because I appreciate these comments from our fellow residents at Pacific Point, but we've got to remember that we are all part of a community. The community has a very diverse geography. And there are parts of the community that were built 35 years ago. And so the maintenance costs alone on maintaining a 35-year-old infrastructure versus something that was created recently down on the spit, because Pacific Point was just built recently. So it's really going to be difficult for me to understand how we can compare costs associated with maintaining a 35-year-old part of the community with one that was just built, because just common sense is going to tell us that there's a lot more maintenance. And so I think this is a discussion for the work group that we want to put together next year. And I hope the people that are on the call that are making these comments will be constructive and come to the meeting with an open mind, and so we can all work together to figure out how we can address this issue.
Just one more comment though on the comparables that you used are for communities where everybody benefits from the dollars spent in those communities. Whereas our community, when we have 27 different communities, some communities benefit, some communities don't benefit at all. So to use a comparable with those communities and our community in terms of assessing how much, you know, we're going to pay, I think completely misses the point.
Well, we all benefit from being a part of Semiahmoo.
Right.
And that's unquantifiable.
That's right. I think you can't ignore, and this is what I made a comment earlier on, this is what I was talking about. You can't ignore the benefit, although you can't quantify it, of somebody coming down the hill, seeing the beauty of Semiahmoo, seeing how well maintained it is and everything's orderly, and they come into your condo and they see it and they fall in love with the place and they get interested in being a property owner here. You just can't ignore that there's a positive impact to all by the community we've created. So if we choose to look at it only as an individual, my building, my unit, then there's challenges. But if you can look at it more broadly, although difficult to quantify, I would submit to you that there's significant value for the work that's done, whether it's not as much on your area as some other area. The cumulative effect of the work that's done is what makes this community what it is, makes it a desirable place for people to want to come in. And that reflects itself in interest in living here, house values when houses, transfer. So there's a bigger picture that has been spoken to by the three people that have focused on this issue on the call. And I just don't think it can be ignored. I can't quantify it for you, but you can't completely ignore it. That would be my argument.
No, we're not ignoring it. We're just asking for equity, for some level of equity in terms of the funds that go in and where they're spent and how they're spent, so that there's equity. Maybe we need to ask for more services, in our community to balance what we're paying in.
Yeah, I think we all agree. So let's move on, and people that are wanting to speak, let's drop the equity discussion, because we're just not going to get any place with the equity discussion. If there's detail about the budget that you want to address, let's address it. But I think we've kind of run the equity discussion out, and We'll be here for days if we don't.
I think the board has, and the community has heard about the equity issue, Steve. You know, and we appreciate you bringing it up, not to diminish it in any way. But if we can, we've had a number of questions. I think that's what Doug's trying to say. If there are other questions by members, we'd like to be able to try to cover a range of questions about the budget. And I think the folks down there, Pacific Point, Marin, Semi Shores have made their point clear, and that's something that will be addressed, no doubt about it. But can we hear about from other members of the community, other portions of the community, about maybe some of their questions? We had a great one from Buzz and Dave Whitmore. I know there's 99 plus people on the call, so there has to be some questions that we haven't covered yet. So Justine, can we have a chat question we haven't had yet?
Should the ASC fees increase to cover the cost of the new gate compliance officer, the single business driver of the ops increase? And also, I've been asked that when you guys are speaking, to state who is speaking, since it is difficult over the chat.
Okay, thank you. Who was that?
That was Pilar Whitmore.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Pilar. That is a good question. One that has come up during discussion, and that is, you know, are we going to increase ASC fees or change ASC fees to try to pay for this ASC compliance position? And that has been discussed.
The request to have you guys say your name was from Pilar. The question was from John and JMB Palin.
Oh, it's on John Palin. Okay, sorry. Good question, John. And do you want this?
He already asked that question. We already addressed, we had that same question from John.
Okay, all right. Well, do we have a different one?
And I think we should make sure that we're asking from different people, you know.
We were told we only have one truck with a plow attachment, and our employees deserve time with their families. I'd really like to hear what they do for us.
What do our employees, so it was from Tom Loshi? Okay, well, Tom, you're asking, we only have one truck with a plow, and what do our employees do for the SRA? Boy, I mean, all year round, you have 3 maintenance folks.
Just go back to the list of accomplishments this year. It's pretty
Yeah,
much.
you have our maintenance director and our journeyman maintenance man, our level 1 maintenance, all working on. Doug asked me to go back here. Let me see if I can do that.
3rd or 4th slide.
Yeah, but it's going to be here. Just one second. Let's go back to here. These are the things that the maintenance department has been working on. But I can tell you, and our treasurer could say, when the power went out not too long ago, there was Dan Rudolph out there at 4:30 in the morning opening the gates. Every single one of them. Yeah, Sandy in the middle of the night.
Is the question possibly focusing on the winter months, since it made reference to the snowplow?
Yeah,
So do our staff stay as busy in the winter as they do in the spring?
maybe so. Maybe so. That's a good point. So
Maybe you could try that and see if that helps.
if that's a little bit more refined question, what does our staff do in the wintertime? All I can say is the maintenance department is very busy. Besides doing things like removing snow, there's just other upkeep that they do. I think you'll see them this year fixing fencing, gates at all the gated entries. I know, and I have myself only been here since February. And I know repair of vehicles. I'm sure there's still landscaping responsibilities that are done by Mike in the middle of winter. So I've not seen anybody not doing anything.
There's clearing the storm drains. We get horrific storms here. There's a lot of debris that's down. Even board members were out cleaning storm drains last year. There's picking up all the branches and debris that falls after the windstorms. So there's a lot of work that's being done.
And so I haven't been here for a full winter cycle, so I just know that they're very busy. They've been very busy since I've been here. I would assume that's the case all year round with 3 maintenance guys. So, and I know, for instance, Dan Rudolph, our maintenance director, has been extremely busy doing planning for budget work on temporary diversion for Boundary Ridge storm system. The work just doesn't end. Right now, we're down in the bioswale, Drayton Harbor doing that, or Drayton Hillside, doing that work in-house and saving the community a lot of money. So they are busy year round as far as I can tell. And like I said, I haven't been here for a full cycle, but I'll have better answers to that question myself when we get through Christmas. Does anybody else want to speak about the budget? Any questions about the budget for those folks that are on?
David, Crow, you're next. David.
David.
Rico.
Okay.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you for the work you guys do. I am the president of the Pacific Point Condominium Owners Association, but I'm here speaking only as an owner and a member of the SRA. And I am not going to go on to the equity issue out of respect for time and the focus of this meeting, but I do hope, because it is a point of contention, I do hope that we continue discussions and make progress on the equality issue throughout the community. So that's not my point though. My understanding, like most associations, the SRA, you guys act in a fiduciary role like we do with our own association. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't want to make that assumption, and please forgive me. This is my first meeting with you guys, but I was notified of it and felt it was important to attend because I know that a lot of the owners down here have been actively involved. When issues come up, budgetary issues, maintenance issues, expenditures into particular neighborhoods, and I know the question was asked as far as tracking that, it seems like it would be a fairly easy thing to track in Excel as to what neighborhood got what and what expenditures. And then we can see what the cost is for each neighborhood. I see you shaking your head, but I've done these things before. But check to see what that is. And then my question is, if you're acting in a fiduciary role, do board members recuse themselves from voting on issues that will only benefit their community or neighborhood?
I can answer that question. That is absolutely the case.
Okay.
I live in Boundary Ridge, for example, and my home was flooded last year. And I only agreed to run and join the board on the basis of that I was completely conflict free, which means that if there's any issue that requires further study or further expenditures to study the stormwater system on Boundary Ridge, I recuse myself completely from any votes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. My other point is, David, I met you one time down here and we met with Matt, the general manager from the resort. And I know that the resort is the highest single payer of SRA dues at about 6%, give or take, which is a substantial amount. And one thing, I've only been down here about 2 years, one of the first owners to move in full time. And the wind does get bad. And we have trees that blow over into that big parking lot. That parking lot, I know you guys fixed the light, and spent about $700 on fixing that light. And I understand you want to take care of the 6% payer, but additional maintenance is the cost of doing business for the resort and should not be shifted on the other communities, for it's a private parking lot. But in that parking lot, they own an area where there are trees, double stacked trees, and each 2 winters I've been here, they've blown over and could potentially cause death or serious injury. They have dead trees. Why is this new compliance position going to be able to hold everyone equally and universally accountable for complying with landscape standards, safety standards, and the such?
I mean, they are members of the community. They're members of SRA. It is commercial property, and I don't know if it has any different standards. Steve, would you know if they have a different standard for landscaping than an HOA or individual sites? No. Okay, no, so they should be, Dave, they should be held to the same standards. As you mentioned,
Okay.
they're a member that pays in, they are members of SRA, so they should be, and that's a very good question. But yes, they should, if they want to cut a tree and it's more than 6 inches in diameter, they would need ASC approval, or if one's sitting there dead.
Yeah.
We should request.
There are, and I know that this is a budget meeting, but I'm just curious, in the compliance position, will they be taking complaints or those type of community concerns and then making whoever the property owner is to be in compliance for a safety standard and a fire safety issue and an appearance issue?
Yeah, I would see them not being exempt from that. No, not at all. I mean, if we get a lot of complaints about lots that are, not maintained, empty lots. And so we'll take those complaints. If we have a new compliance officer and we have the changes that we're going to be requesting to enforcement, that should be something that happens in a much more expedited fashion and much more, equally across the community. But I don't see the resort as being anyway immune or exempt from that.
Yeah, and we do appreciate the SRA fixing those lights because that was a concern. And talking with Matt, the general manager, he was in the transition. He wasn't even aware that was their parking lot. So thank you for your clarity on that and coming to that impromptu meeting, David.
No, not a problem. A pleasure. Thanks, Dave, for your comments.
You bet.
Okay, Justine, who do we have on a chat?
Even Steve. What? First, I appreciate the volunteers and work at the right employees. Second, as part of the process, have there been any areas of good news, example cost savings?
Have there been examples of good news,
Example cost savings.
example cost savings?
There are some line items in the budget that
Oh,
are lower.
yeah.
You got into the research.
Steve?
Well, I think a number of the things that Dan has done in-house rather than outsourcing them, sign production and repair and that sort of thing, have been done with an eye toward cost saving.
Mhm. Yeah, we have very capable maintenance staff, Steve, and right now. And they have all of the work that Dan has done and Leroy have done. I would say that Crestwood Village Gate, that would have cost, we're looking at a cost of $7,000. It would have been $28,000 for sure. Outsourced, and some of the bioswale that they're working on right now, we're thinking about probably $55,000 for the total cost that would be just materials. But I would say, you're probably looking at 3 to 4 times that amount if it was an outside contractor. So that's probably some of the biggest areas of savings, I would think, is just by having very capable staff right now in our maintenance department doing a lot of that in-house. Again, I have not been here long enough in a cycle to see, you know, some of the savings that we might be seeing over the next year. As Jim had mentioned, there are some reductions, even though you're seeing an overall increase in the budget and the operating budget, especially. There were areas that we diminished expenses from prior year. So, you know, I can, and if you have interest in some of the detail on that, I can provide it to you. And I think just in general, you know, please feel free, being possible with 99 people on this call, we could be sitting here probably all day and night to try to answer all of your questions, but I would like to try to do so. And so you can send me an email, a very good way to do it. I have no problem setting aside some time, at least after Tuesday, so I can get the next budget slide deck prepared for the capital meeting to sit down with people and go over this budget if they like detail. Some people do, some people are numbers people. And I have no problem in sharing that with you and going over it. So that just a general, you know, announcement out to everybody that's out there and that's been on the call today. And a great showing that I can see from the number of people that are online today. So a great deal of thanks to all of you for making. I was kind of worried that this Saturday afternoon I'd be sitting here with a few board members and only a handful of people out in Semiahmoo. So it really does make the Saturday afternoon worthwhile. So let's see, can we have somebody else? And I know, well, before we take somebody else, board, this is it's 4 o'clock. We've been here since 2. What was your plan on? I know it's Saturday afternoon. Take a few more questions and then we'll wrap it up. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I don't want to cut people short. This is very important. We're having a meeting on Tuesday, August 30th to talk about capital reserve study, and then we'll have reconvene. We'll have this meeting going over all of it on September 13th at 6 o'clock. So hopefully if you formulate questions or get more questions, you have more concerns, you can let us know over the next week or so and then attend that meeting. So
Hey,
okay,
folks. Yeah, I've raised my hand a few times. I'm John Cross. I'm a seasonal resident here. Been here for about 4 years. And honestly, this is an affluent community. Your projected monthly increase is a hell of a lot cheaper than my wife and I having a glass of wine and a meal at the Vault in downtown Blaine. You know, I could easily absorb an extra $40 a month. I you know, maybe there are some issues about, you know, whether the guys at the $1 million townhouses down at the Spit can afford it. I mean, guys, it's not a ton of money. And I realize, you know, yes, we all want, you know, we all want to pay the right price, but Jesus, I mean, I have no problems paying an increase. Every guest that I've had come up here has been so impressed that I've gotten my brother to buy a lot up here. I've got 2 people right now back in my family that are seriously considering moving up here to get a seasonal home out of California because the prices are right here. It is a beautiful area. Once you drive up Semiahmoo Parkway and they see the trees and there's no billboards and you go inside the gates and you see the beautiful landscape homes and you go down to the Spit and they say, wow, this is impressive. What is your vision statement to make this the premier Northwest community? I mean, we've got it, guys. If you didn't have the reputation of Semiahmoo, the Pacific Point condominiums would not be carrying $1 million starting price. All right. So that's the people that are down there. Yeah, they paid a lot of money for it, but you know what? Semiahmoo established this place, and the beauty of this place, it's just incredible. It's incredible. I get so many compliments when we have guests come up here in the summertime, and you know, I'm only up here really in the summertime. I do come up in the winter just to see some snow once in a while. But I mean, it's gorgeous up here, folks, and you got to appreciate that. And the lousy $50 a month increase is nothing. All right. I'm not watching my pennies. I'm 72 years old. You know, I haven't got that much more life in me. So I have no problems with the fees that I'm paying. And I'm only here maybe 4 months a year. All right, guys. We are not, you know, we don't have low income folks living here.
Thank you, John.
And I appreciate the fact that, you know, we have some rules here. I mean, you can't leave your pickup truck parked in the street and blah, 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 and have a have a pickup truck parked in somebody's driveway that says Joe Sewer Cleaners. I mean, I appreciate all those little things, guys. It's gorgeous here. Appreciate it, please.
Thank you.
Thank
Sorry,
you,
I'm
Jim.
venting because I'm.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, John.
More
So
questions?
anything else, Justine? Do we have another chat?
Yes.
Okay.
Half Pines iPad asks, if landscaping is outsourced, what will the maintenance team be doing?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. And that was from,
Half Pines iPad.
oh, Half Pint iPad. Okay.
Well, who is that? Well, I guess we can't tell. can we?
Yeah, so if landscaping gets outsourced, what will the maintenance department be doing? Well, right now we are outsourcing much of the landscaping to Celis. We got landscaping, we got that established late. Our first, we got ghosted by the first landscaper that we hired. It was very reputable. But so we got started on that late. But when it comes to Leroy, you can probably see him driving around sweeping your streets. Dan and he have been welding gates and repairing those to bring those up to safety standards. Mike is out constantly, as Jeff had mentioned, picking up branches. There's watering that's being done because we don't have all the gates that are currently set up for irrigation. So there is plenty for a 3-person maintenance department to do, especially with the amount of deferred maintenance that has accrued over the last 30 years here. Again, I think what Jeff had mentioned earlier, hey, when everything's brand new, you don't have to do much. But 30 years into it, things are fine. You can see, look at all the signs when you drive by, and we're trying to get to those. I mean, some of them are rotten so bad they're falling over. And it's not as though we haven't noticed. We're just trying to get to it. There is a backlog of maintenance that could keep 3 guys going, not doing a single thing in landscaping for the next couple of years.
Okay, next question. Live question.
One more.
One more
One
live.
more last live question.
One more.
This one is from Buzz Abercrombie, and other people were asking about it too. I noted on that the board obtained and evaluated comparative salaries that showed our staff was significantly underpaid. Hence, a proposed increase in salaries between 30 and 46%. Can you share with us what the sources of information were that led you to this conclusion?
In the comparative study? So the question is where did the information for the comparative wage study come from?
But also, I don't think any salary got increased 38 or 40%, so.
No,
I think it was like a total overall.
Oh, okay, he's okay, good.
total overall. Yeah, so as we know that as far as the impact on compensation for payroll is a lot, most of that is that additional hire we're talking about. The rest of it is increases in cost of living and then market analysis, wage increases for mostly administrative staff and then also one of our maintenance staff. The information for that study, and Buzz, for anybody, I'm happy to share it with you. It came from, well, we did a study at Shelter Bay in 2019. Some of this is from wages from Sudden Valley, as far as an HOA, Glen Haven down in Skagit County, the city of Blaine, LaConner, Burlington. So we use small cities in the area that had similar functions because we are basically a governmental agency in a way. And so all of those were compared. When we looked at the 2019, which is, we're going into 2023, 2019 wage comparison of those similar job descriptions, many of Semiahmo's staff were under, and some significantly under those 2019 numbers of HOAs in this area, locally. So we're not talking about all across the country, but here in Skagit and Whatcom County and small municipalities in Skagit and Whatcom County. So I have that information and I have no problem sharing it with you, but And again, we're looking at 2019 numbers, not even contemporary numbers from 2022 or 2021.
Can we take one more live?
One more live? Okay, Jim wants one more live. Anybody out there like to ask a question, especially one that has not been asked before?
I don't have anyone who has raised their hand.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I just want to thank everybody that's on the call, that raised your hand, spoke, those that didn't raise their hand. This is constructively how a community gets better and how a community comes together to create a good budget. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your participation.
And we expect to see all of you Tuesday at 7 p.m. To talk about capital improvements, reserve study. And we can wrap up. What we expect to do is have another question and answer session, because this video will be posted online for those people that couldn't join us today. We hope that people will review it, and then they may show up for questions at the end of the session on Tuesday. And then we'll see you all again on September 13th.
And if you have suggestions for where the budget should be changed, send them to David.
Yeah.
Or send them to Lori or Justine.
GM at srahoa.com. GM at srahoa.com. And again, thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Great to see so many people join us today. So thank you. Okay.